Steam rose slowly from the coffee cup, tracing spirals against the fogged window glass. Jayla watched the snow blanket the school steps like a silent shroud, while the morning cold bit at her fingers, even inside the classroom. She always arrived early, half an hour before the bell, half an hour before the world woke up, because she knew that time belonged to her. The heater rumbled in the corner, fighting against the Colorado winter, and she arranged the worn books on each desk with the care of someone placing flowers on an altar. There was something sacred about that morning ritual, something that made her believe that despite everything, it was still worth it. The truth was that Jayla was tired, not just the kind of tired that a good night's sleep could fix, but the kind that settles into your bones, that weighs on your shoulders like old wet snow. The school budget cuts kept coming one after another like waves that never let up. There wasn't enough paper, wasn't enough ink, sometimes there wasn't even chalk. But what hurt most was seeing the children arrive hungry, that kind of hunger you can't hide, that shines in small eyes and makes stomachs growl in the middle of math class. And every time she heard that sound, Jayla felt like she was failing a little bit more. But she didn't give up. She would never give up, because between one cup of coffee and the next, between grading tests and the handwritten motivational notes she wrote for each student, Jayla carried with her a stubborn conviction that education was love in the form of action. She saw in the eyes of Sam, of Ellie, of all those little hearts, the spark of curiosity still alive. And as long as that flame existed, no matter how small, she would feed it with everything she had. Even if it was just with stories, with smiles, with her presence alone. That morning, before opening the door for her students, Jayla picked up her battered copy of The Little Prince, the one with yellowed pages and a cover mended with tape. She always opened it on difficult days, like someone seeking an old friend. "What is essential is invisible to the eye," she murmured softly, running her fingers across the words. And it was true, wasn't it? The love she felt for teaching, the hope she insisted on planting every day, the faith that a well-cared-for child could change the world. None of it could be measured in spreadsheets or justified in reports. But it was real as the cold seeping through the cracks in the window. The bell rang, and the sound echoed through the empty hallway like a call. Jayla took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, that gesture of hers, that moment of reconnection, and opened the door. The children tumbled in, bringing with them snowflakes on their coats and laughter that melted any winter. Sam ran up to her and wrapped his arms around her waist, and Jayla felt her heart squeeze in that good way, the kind that hurts and heals at the same time. "Good morning, teacher!" Ellie shouted, and in that good morning there was so much life that Jayla almost forgot her exhaustion. Almost. Because when the last child left, when silence returned to fill the classroom, and she found herself alone grading tests under the dim afternoon light, the exhaustion hit again. Jayla looked out the window and saw the city preparing for another cold night. Aspen was beautiful, with its snow-covered mountains and lights that twinkled like fallen stars. But sometimes beauty and loneliness walked hand in hand. She gathered the papers into her bag, turned off the light, and locked the door. Tomorrow would be another day. Tomorrow she would believe again. She had to. That's when she saw it. There, on the snow-covered steps, a cardboard box. Big, heavy, damp from the moisture. Jayla frowned, descended carefully, and knelt beside it. There was no name, no return address, just a box full of new books with glossy covers, the smell of fresh paper, pages that hadn't yet been touched by small, curious hands. Her heart raced. She looked around, searching for someone, any sign of who might have left this here. But the street was empty, silent, as if the city itself was keeping a secret. and at the bottom of the box, a damp note with just one sentence written by hand. For those who still believe in children. Jayla carried the box into the school with her heart racing as if she were carrying treasure stolen from fate itself. Her arms trembled, not just from the weight, but from the emotion rising in her throat and threatening to spill over in tears. She placed the box on her desk, took out the books one by one, and lined them up with reverence. These were titles she could never afford on her own salary. Children's classics, picture books, adventure stories that would make the children's eyes shine. And then, with fingers still frozen, she picked up the damp note and read it again. For those who still believe in children. There was no signature, no name, just those words that seemed to have been written by someone who knew her, who saw her, who understood. And that was, at the same time, comforting and unsettling. The next morning, Principal Donnelly walked into her classroom with a stern expression. He was a man of few words and many worries, someone who had learned to distrust miracles because life had taught him that nothing came for free. "Where did these books come from, Jayla?" he asked, crossing his arms. She showed him the note, and he read it with narrowed eyes, as if searching for a hidden trick between the letters. Anonymous donations don't exist. Someone always wants something in return. Jayla took a deep breath, feeling frustration rise. What if this time it's not like that? What if someone just wanted to help? Donnelly shook his head, but his eyes betrayed a glimmer of hope he was trying to hide. "I'll accept them because we need them. But be careful, Jayla. The world isn't made of fairy tales." But maybe it was. Or maybe there were people who still wanted to make it a less gray, less cold place. Jayla handed out the books to the children that afternoon, and the joy that erupted in the classroom was like the sun breaking through heavy clouds. Sam hugged his book as if it were the greatest gift he'd ever received in his life. Ellie leafed through the pages with wide eyes, whispering, "Is it really mine?" And Jayla, watching it all, felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: gratitude. Not just for the books, but for the idea that someone, somewhere, cared. Someone she didn't know, but who somehow saw her, and that changed everything. On the other side of town, in a glass-walled office with a view of the mountains, Jason Wheeler stared at a photograph on his desk. It wasn't of the school, it was of his wife, smiling in that way he would never see again. 3 years. 3 years since she left, taking with her the light he thought was eternal. Since then, Jason had learned to live in silence, in emptiness, in the automatic routine of signing papers and attending meetings that meant nothing. He had built an empire, but forgotten how to build a life. And every night when he returned to that empty mansion, he wondered if there was anything left in him besides ash.
It was Kayla who changed that. His assistant, pragmatic and direct, but with a heart that insisted on beating louder than reason allowed. She walked into the office that afternoon with a folder and a determined look. "Jason, I need you to do something for me. Not for business, not out of obligation. For you." He looked up, surprised. Kayla rarely asked for anything personal. "The school where I studied needs help. Materials, repairs, anything. You have resources, but I know you need something more. You need a reason." Jason fell silent, processing. He knew she was right. Making a donation was easy, signing a check, delegating the task, but going there, seeing where the money would make a difference, feeling the impact, that was another story. Kayla placed a photo of the school on the desk. It was old, simple, with snow-covered steps and fogged windows. But there was something in that image that touched Jason in a strange way. Maybe it was the honesty of that place, the absence of pretense, or maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in years, someone was asking him to truly get involved, to emerge from the cocoon of indifference he'd built around his own heart. "I don't know if I can," he admitted quietly. And Kayla, with that fierce loyalty that only someone who has watched someone destroy themselves can have, replied, You don't need to know. You just need to try. Jason stared at the photo for a long time after Kayla left. There were children on the steps, blurred by movement, and a teacher with her back turned, adjusting the door. He couldn't see her face, but he could see her posture, tired but steady. And suddenly, without quite understanding why, Jason picked up the phone and made the call. He scheduled a visit, anonymous, discreet, just to see. Just to feel if there was still something inside him capable of caring. And for the first time in 3 years, he slept that night without the weight of loneliness crushing his chest, because there was a small, good restlessness growing inside, a whisper that said, maybe it's not too late yet.
Jason entered the school like someone entering a sacred place, slowly, almost hesitantly, as if his footsteps might profane something precious. The hallway smelled of chalk and old paper, and there were children's drawings taped to the walls, yellow suns, houses with crooked chimneys, stick-figure families smiling. He stopped in front of one where a child had written in shaky letters, "I love my teacher." Something tightened in Jason's chest. It had been so long since he'd felt anything besides emptiness that this stab of emotion caught him off guard. Kayla was beside him, watching him carefully, and simply pointed to the half-open door at the end of the hall. "It's there," she said softly, and Jason took a deep breath, the kind you take before leaping into the dark. He pushed the door open slowly, and what he saw completely disarmed him. Jayla was sitting on the floor among the small desks, with a circle of children around her. The book open in her hands was The Little Prince, and her voice, God, that voice was like warm honey on a cold morning. She read with gentleness, but also with conviction, as if every word mattered, as if she were planting seeds in fertile ground. "You become forever responsible for what you have tamed," she read, and then looked at the children with a sweet smile. "Do you know what that means?" Sam raised his hand, excited, "that we have to take care of the people we love." Jayla nodded, and the pride in her eyes was so genuine that Jason felt his chest tighten again. That's when she saw him. Jayla raised her eyes and met his gaze, and for an instant the world seemed to pause. Jason stood in the doorway, tall, out of place in that small environment, but there was something in his face that didn't match his imposing figure: vulnerability. She didn't know who he was, had no idea that this man in a dark suit with tired eyes was responsible for the box of books. To her, she was just a visitor, maybe a parent, maybe someone lost. "Hi," she said simply, and in that single word there was an invitation, an openness. "Want to join us?" Jason hesitated. All his defenses, all the walls he'd built over the years, screamed at him to back away. But something stronger made him take a step forward. He sat in one of the desks, too big for that space, clearly uncomfortable, but trying. The children looked at him with curiosity, and Ellie, always the boldest, asked, "Are you new here?" Jason almost smiled. "Something like that," he replied, and his voice sounded strange even to himself, as if he'd forgotten how to speak lightly. Jayla resumed reading, and Jason found himself completely absorbed, not just by the words of the book, but by the way she delivered them. There was passion there, yes, but also tenderness, a genuine connection with those children that went beyond a teacher's duty. She loved them. It was visible in every gesture, in every look. And Jason realized he was witnessing something rare, someone who still believed, who still gave themselves fully, who still had an open heart even though the world insisted on hurting it. When the reading ended, the children burst out for recess in an explosion of energy and laughter, and Jayla stayed behind, organizing the books with that meticulous care Jason was already beginning to recognize as part of her. He stood up, not quite knowing what to say, but feeling he needed to say something. "Thank you," he began, and Jayla looked up, surprised. "For letting me stay. It's been a while since I've seen something like this." She tilted her head, studying him with those eyes that seemed to see beyond masks. "Something like what?" "Hope," he answered, and the word came out so raw, so honest, that he startled himself. Jayla smiled, not a sad smile, but a smile that understood. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps us standing. They talked for a few minutes there, in the empty classroom, while the sound of children playing outside came through the open windows. Jason learned that Jayla had been teaching for 7 years, that each student was a different story, that she believed education was the only true revolution. And Jayla learned that this man, despite all his formality, carried a deep pain in his eyes, the kind of pain that recognizes pain. There was no judgment between them, no rush, just two tired souls finding, by chance or by fate, a small refuge in each other. When Jason finally said goodbye, he stopped at the door and looked back. "Can I come back?" The question came out before he could filter it. "Next week. To help more." Jayla felt something strange in her chest, a spark, a subtle warmth, like the first rays of sun after a long winter. She couldn't explain it, but there was something about this man that touched her. Maybe the honesty of his fragility. Maybe the fact that he truly listened when she spoke, something people rarely did. "Of course," she replied, and her voice carried a warmth she didn't expect from herself. "There's always room for those who want to help." Jason nodded, and for the first time in a long while, a genuine smile touched his lips. He left that school different from when he'd entered, and Jayla stayed there, alone again, but not feeling quite so alone, because something had begun, something that neither of them knew how to name yet, but that was already planted, waiting only for the right time to bloom. The following weeks brought a new routine, a different rhythm that Jayla didn't expect, but came to anticipate with a good kind of anxiety, the kind that makes your heart beat a little faster. Jason came back, and came back again. Every Thursday, promptly at 3 in the afternoon, he appeared at the school door with new materials, colored pencils, notebooks, a digital whiteboard that made the children's eyes shine like stars. But what really mattered wasn't the things he brought, it was his presence, the way he sat on the floor with Sam to help him with math, the patience with which he listened to Ellie tell endless stories about her imaginary dog. Jason was learning something he'd forgotten, how to be present. And Jayla watched this transformation happen before her eyes, like watching ice melt under the spring sun. They started walking together after class. It wasn't planned, it just happened. One day, Jason offered to walk her to the cafe where she usually graded tests, and Jayla accepted without thinking much about it. Their steps in the fresh snow created a synchronized rhythm, a tempo that felt natural, as if they'd always walked side by side. They talked about everything and nothing, about the books she loved, about the business he'd built, about how beautiful Aspen looked when afternoon fell and the city lights began to twinkle. But they also talked about the important things, about losses, about fears, about how hard it is to move forward when the past insists on pulling you back. And in each conversation, the walls they'd both erected were, brick by brick, being dismantled. Jason told her about his wife, not on the first day or the second, but on a particularly cold afternoon, when the snow fell heavy and they took shelter under the awning of a closed shop. The words came out slowly, painfully, like someone removing glass shards from an old wound. "She was everything to me," he said, looking at the ground. "And when she left, I left, too. I just kept breathing, but I wasn't alive." Jayla said nothing for a moment, just placed her hand over his, a simple gesture, but one that carried more comfort than 1,000 words. "I know what it's like to live like that," she replied softly. "I know what it's like to survive instead of live." And in that shared silence, in that mutual understanding, something deep settled between them. It wasn't pity, it was connection. It was recognition. It was the affection that's born when two wounded souls find shelter in each other. The children noticed before the adults did. Children always notice. Sam, with that frankness only little ones have, asked one day, "Teacher, is Mr. Jason your boyfriend?" Jayla felt her face grow hot, and Jason, who was helping Ellie with a drawing, choked slightly. "No, Sam," Jayla replied, trying to sound casual. "He's just a friend who's helping us." But Sam frowned, unconvinced. "But you smile different when he comes, and he smiles different when he looks at you, too." And there it was, said. The children returned to their activities as if nothing had happened, but Jayla and Jason exchanged a glance, half embarrassed, half amused, half frightened, because Sam was right, and they both knew it. The truth was that Jayla began to wait for those Thursdays like someone waiting for sun after cloudy days. She found herself choosing clothes more carefully, putting on subtle lipstick, pinning her hair differently. And when she saw Jason walk through the door with that half-shy smile he reserved just for her, she felt her chest tighten in a good way, but also a scary way. Because Jayla had learned to live alone, not to depend on anyone, to build her fortress of independence. And now, suddenly, there was someone scaling the walls, someone she didn't want to send away. But what if he left? What if she allowed herself to feel, and then everything crumbled? Fear knocked at the door every night, whispering that it was better to pull back before it was too late. Jason wrestled with the same ghosts. He woke in the early hours, sweating, with the weight of guilt crushing his chest. Guilt for feeling again, for allowing someone else to occupy the space he swore belonged eternally to the wife he'd lost. "I still love you," he whispered to the photo on his nightstand, "but I also can't stand being dead anymore." And that was it, wasn't it? He wasn't betraying a memory by allowing himself to live again. He was honoring the life she would have wanted for him. Kayla had told him once, "She wouldn't want to see you like this. She would want you to be happy." And maybe, just maybe, Jayla was the way back to happiness. Not the same happiness, not the same love, but something new. Something that could still bloom even in the snow. On one Thursday, after a particularly good afternoon, Jason and Jayla were walking through downtown Aspen when he suddenly stopped. The snow fell softly like white petals, and the lights from the shop windows created a golden glow around them. He looked at her, really looked, with that intensity that made Jayla forget how to breathe. "Jayla," he began, and his voice trembled slightly. "I thought love was over for me. I thought I'd been buried with her. But you proved me wrong." Jayla felt tears sting her eyes, but didn't let them fall. Not yet. "Jason, She didn't know what to say. How to say she felt the same. How to say she was also afraid, but that for the first time in years, she wanted to take the risk. He took a step forward, and the distance between them diminished until there was nothing left but the warmth emanating from two bodies defying the winter cold. And in that moment, with the snow falling and the whole world seeming to hold its breath, something irreversible happened. They crossed the line, and there was no going back. Everything changed on a Saturday morning. Jayla woke to her phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand, and when she finally answered, it was Principal Donnelly's distressed Louis on the other end of the line. "Jayla, have you seen the newspaper?" She frowned, still groggy. "What newspaper?" There was a heavy pause, and then he sighed. "You'd better see for yourself." Jayla's heart raced, that kind of premonition that comes before a storm. She ran down to her front door, grabbed the local newspaper lying there, and when she opened the front page, the world collapsed. There she was, her photo, taken from a distance, walking beside Jason down the street, and the headline, in bold letters, "Billionaire and Teacher, Romance or Interest." The air fled from her lungs as if someone had punched her in the stomach. The article was cruel in its subtlety. It didn't accuse directly, but insinuated, the way only tabloids know how. It talked about Jason's generous donations to the school, about how he'd started attending classes regularly, about the close involvement with the young teacher. And then came the poisonous questions. Was it true philanthropic interest, or were there other motivations? Was the teacher taking advantage of the situation, or was it the other way around? Jayla read every word with trembling hands, feeling shame and anger rise in waves. She, who had always lived with integrity, who had always put her students first, was now being painted as an opportunist, as someone who used children to get to a rich man. The injustice burned like acid. On Monday, when she arrived at school, the stairs were the first thing she noticed. Whispers that stopped when she passed, forced smiles, that heavy silence that screams louder than any words. Principal Donnelly called her into his office, and the embarrassment was written all over his face. "Jayla, I know you trust you, but the board is concerned. Parents have called. Some are questioning whether—" He couldn't finish, and didn't need to. Jayla understood perfectly. They were questioning her professionalism, her ethics, her reputation built over 7 years of absolute dedication. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. "I didn't know who he was when we met. He came as a volunteer, and we just connected." Donnelly nodded, but his eyes said what his mouth couldn't. The truth didn't matter. Perception did. Jason, on the other side of town, faced his own storm. The article reached the board of directors of his companies, and the calls started early. There were concerns about unnecessary exposure, about bad publicity, about how this could affect business. Kayla walked into his office with a stern face, threw the newspaper on the desk. "This has gone too far. Who leaked it?" Jason ran his hands over his face, exhausted. He didn't know. Maybe some opportunistic photographer, maybe someone from inside the company itself. In his world, privacy was an illusion. "I need to protect her," he said, more to himself than to Kayla. "I need to take the spotlight off her." But Kayla shook her head, with that sadness of someone who's seen this movie before. "Jason, you can control a lot of things, but you can't control how people interpret what they see. And now she's in the middle of a war she didn't ask to fight." Jayla avoided Jason for 3 days. She didn't answer his calls, didn't respond to his messages. She needed to think, needed to understand what she was feeling beyond the anger and humiliation. And the truth that emerged was painful. She was afraid of losing her credibility, afraid that the children would suffer by association, afraid that everything she'd fought for would be destroyed by something she couldn't control. But more than that, she was afraid of the imbalance. Jason lived in a world of power and privilege, where problems could be solved with money and influence. She lived in the real world, where reputations mattered, where a stain could mean the end of a career. And that chasm between them, which before had seemed so small, now seemed insurmountable. When Jason finally managed to find her, waiting at the school door under the relentlessly falling snow, the look she gave him cut deeper than any words. "You don't understand," she said, and her voice was loaded with a pain he recognized because he carried it too. "For you, this is an inconvenience. For me, it's my entire life. These children depend on me. This community trusts me. And now they doubt." Jason stepped forward, desperate to fix, to protect, to do anything that would ease that suffering. "I'll sue the newspaper. I'll issue a statement. I'll do whatever it takes to clear your name." But Jayla shook her head, and a tear finally escaped. "You can't fix this with money, Jason. You can't buy back my reputation." The silence between them weighed like the snow accumulating around them. Jason wanted to scream that it wasn't about money, that it was about love, about wanting to protect the one he loved. But the words stuck in his throat, because he also knew she was right. His world, his solutions, his way of dealing with problems, none of it applied to her reality. And for the first time, he found himself completely powerless. "Then what do you want me to do?" he asked, and his voice was just a broken whisper. Jayla wiped her tears with the back of her hand, took a deep breath, that gesture of hers, that moment of reconnecting with her own strength. I need time. I need to think about whether we can survive this. And then she turned and walked into the school, leaving Jason alone in the snow with a shattered heart and the terrible certainty that maybe, this time, love wasn't enough. Maybe winter had returned, and maybe this time there was no spring waiting on the other side. 3 months passed like a silent, endless winter. Jason left Aspen, not because he wanted to, but because he understood that staying would prolong her pain, would feed the rumors, would make it even harder for Jayla to rebuild the peace that had been stolen from her. He returned to Denver, dove into work like someone drowning on purpose, but every night he looked at the mountains in the distance and thought of her. He thought of her smile when she read to the children, the way her eyes shone when she talked about education, the way she took a deep breath before making difficult decisions. And every night he asked himself the same thing. Had he been a coward for leaving? Or had it been the only courageous thing he could do? Kayla tried to cheer him up, but even she, with all her loyalty, knew that some wounds don't heal with time. They just learn to hurt less. In Aspen, Jayla rebuilt her life brick by brick, like someone rebuilding a house after a fire. The media storm passed, as they all do, replaced by the next tragedy, the next scandal. Parents came to trust again. Students never stopped loving her. And Principal Donnelly gave her an awkward hug one random day, saying only, "You're stronger than I imagined." But the nights were hard. Jayla lay in bed and felt the emptiness on the left side, that space that had never been occupied, but now seemed to scream with someone's absence. She didn't regret asking for time. She needed it to survive, to not lose herself completely. But she also couldn't forget, couldn't erase his smile, his voice, the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. And then came the question that haunted her. In protecting her life, had she lost the chance to truly live it? It was on an April morning when the thaw began and the sound of water dripping from rooftops announced spring that Jayla received an envelope. It had no return address, just her name written in that handwriting she would recognize anywhere. Inside, a single sheet of paper. "Jayla, I made a decision. I handed my company over to my brother. I don't need all that anymore. I don't want to live in a world where what I have matters more than who I am. I don't know if there's still room for me in your life, but if there is, I'd like to try again, without spotlights, without pressure, without the weight of what I was. Just me and you, and the possibility of building something real. I'll be in Aspen next Thursday. If you want to see me, I'll be at the school at 3 in the afternoon. If you don't show up, I'll understand, and I'll respect it. But I need you to know, you taught me to live again, and no matter what happens, I'll be eternally grateful for that. Jason." Jayla read the letter 3 times with trembling hands and her heart beating so hard she felt her pulse in her throat. He had given up everything. Everything. Not for her, she knew that, but for himself. Because he finally understood that wealth without purpose is just a pretty burden to carry, and that love, true love, isn't built on power imbalances, but on conscious choices to be together despite the difficulties. Jayla closed her eyes and took a deep breath. That gesture, that reconnection with her own strength, and for the first time in months, she knew exactly what to do. There was no more fear, no more shame. There was only the simple, crystal-clear truth. She loved him too. And love, when it's real, deserves a second chance. Thursday arrived with a shy sun and a clear sky that Aspen hadn't seen in months. The children were restless, feeling in their bones that energy that spring brings, the promise of renewal, of beginnings. Jayla taught all morning on autopilot, her heart divided between hope and nervousness. 3 o'clock approached like a sentence, and she didn't know if Jason would really come, if this wasn't just a dream, a fantasy she'd built to survive the gray days. But then, exactly at 3, the door opened, and there he was. Not in a suit, not surrounded by security or assistants, just Jason, in jeans and a simple jacket, his eyes searching for hers with that vulnerability she'd learned to love. And when their gazes met, the entire world seemed to sigh with relief. The children erupted in joy. Sam ran to hug him, shouting, "You're back! You're back!" And Ellie jumped around him as if it were Christmas. Jason knelt to get to their level, hugged each one, asked questions about the drawings and stories they had to tell. And Jayla watched it all with tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of something she thought she'd lost. Hope. Hope that some things really can work out, that some people really do come back, that love, when it's genuine, finds a way even through the densest snow. When the children finally calmed down and went out for recess, Jason and Jayla were left alone in the classroom. The silence between them was loaded with everything that hadn't been said, with all the days of distance, with all the nights of longing. "You came," Jayla said, and her voice came out choked. Jason took a step forward, slowly, like someone who doesn't want to scare something precious. "I'll always come, when you need me, when you allow it, because there's nowhere in this world I'd rather be than by your side." She let out a tearful laugh, wiped the tears that insisted on falling. "You gave up everything." "No," he interrupted gently. "I gave up what didn't matter, and I found what's really worthwhile." He extended his hand, and Jayla took it. That simple touch, that bond that seemed capable of holding the entire universe together. "Winter's over," she whispered. And she wasn't just talking about the seasons. She was talking about loneliness, about fear, about the barriers they'd both erected around their own hearts. Jason smiled, that smile she loved so much, the one that reached his eyes and made them shine. "Yes," he replied, pulling her close, embracing her in an embrace that was both refuge and promise. "And I can finally believe in spring." Outside, the snow melted under the sun, and through the school window you could hear the children's laughter mixed with the sound of running water. A new beginning, a fresh start, a second chance for the love that refused to freeze even in the longest winter. And for the first time in a long while, they both knew they had found the home they'd always been searching for, not in a place, but in each other. Just as Jayla and Jason discovered that love can transform even the harshest winters into springs full of hope, each of us also carries that power of renewal within. Their story shows us that no matter how many storms we face, no matter how many times the world tries to convince us it's too late to start over, there's always a new chance waiting when we have the courage to open our hearts. True love isn't the kind that only appears on easy days, but the kind that chooses to stay even when everything seems to conspire against it. It's the love that crosses through judgment, that survives distance, that rebuilds itself on the ashes of fear. And it's that kind of love that transforms not just two lives, but everyone around them. Stories like this remind us that it's never too late to believe again, to allow ourselves to feel, to give a second chance to the heart we thought was broken beyond repair. Jayla and Jason teach us that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the greatest form of courage. That letting go of what no longer serves us, to embrace what truly matters, is the path to real happiness. And that sometimes the best love stories don't begin with fireworks, but with silent steps in the snow, with glances that understand without needing words, with the conscious choice to be present despite everything. If this story touched you in some way, if it warmed your heart or made you believe a little more in the transformative power of love, write in the comments, "Love transforms lives." We want to know how this journey resonated with you, what emotions it awakened, and if there's any story in your own life that connects with Jayla and Jason's. Each comment, each word shared, creates a community of people who still believe that love is always worthwhile. Subscribe to Eternal Romance Stories and experience with each episode emotions that warm the soul and reflections that transform the heart. Here you'll find stories that celebrate love in all its forms, the love that heals, the love that challenges, the love that reminds us why it's worth being alive. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new story, and be part of this journey of emotion and hope with us. And this was just one of many stories that will still move you here, because as long as there are hearts that feel, as long as there are souls seeking connection, there will always be love stories waiting to be told. And the next one might be even more touching than this one. See you soon, and may spring always find its way to you.